special treat for you. We have Dr. Ashish Jha here from CNN fame. Dr. Jha, yeah, thanks for the excitement there. Dr. Jha was appointed by Joe Biden as the White House COVID-19 response coordinator in March of 2022, describing him as one of the leading public health experts in America. He is one of the most highly cited researchers in the nation, having published more than 300 publications in the most prestigious medical journals. He is also a frequent contributor to lots of public media, obviously including CNN. So without further ado, we're going to turn it over to Dr. Jha.
Thank you. All right, good evening, everybody. Guys, hear me okay? Yay, okay. So I'm going to take about the next 10 to 12 minutes to talk a little bit about where we are as a country in terms of health policy under the second Trump administration, and what I think the role of physicians should be at this point. And I hear a lot of chatter, if you guys want to listen. Thank you. So I think the first thing to understand, people have asked me all evening, all day, what's going on with the Trump administration? How do we understand it? So let me tell you how I understand it. I spend probably about half my time these days in Washington, meeting with people in Congress, meeting with people in the administration. When it comes to health, and this will make a difference in your life as a physician, so worth paying attention. When it comes to health, there are two different camps that make up the Trump administration. There is the traditional Trump administration, the people who served in the first term, and then there's a whole new group of people who have joined inside the administration at HHS that really are people who work for Robert F. Kennedy, part of the MAHA movement. And so what you're going to hear as I lay out their policy priorities is a mix of traditional Republican ideas and some Robert F. Kennedy ideas. Okay, so if you want to understand at a high level, not like food dyes and ultra-processed foods, most of which is a distraction, the major policy interests of what's going to come out of Washington that's going to affect all of your pocketbooks. And people can just be quiet because I'm hearing a lot of talking right back at me, so if you can just focus or just quiet down, that'd be great. Maybe. Okay. Here's the most important thing to understand. Right now, this year, we're going to spend about $5 trillion on healthcare in America. By the way, that comes out to about $15,000 for every man, woman, and child. The projections are by 2034, we're going to be at about $9 trillion a year. Okay? It's about $25,000 for every man, woman, and child in America. About half of that is going to come from the federal government. And if you believe the projections, 9 years from now, 10 years from now, half of the revenue that the US government takes in will go to spending on Medicare and Medicaid and other health programs. Half. Doesn't count interest, doesn't count defense, doesn't count anything else. That is untenable. The federal government is not going to tolerate that. And if you watched what happened with One Big Beautiful Bill, to me, this is an opening salvo into what is coming in the next year, 2 or 3, in terms of cuts to the health programs in this country. So let's talk very quickly about what was in One Big Beautiful Bill. The primary focus was on Medicaid and reducing eligibility, putting in work requirements. And then the other big part that's going to happen is we're going to get rid of some of the enhanced ACA subsidies. What does this all mean? It means that somewhere between 15 and 20 million Americans are going to lose health insurance over the next 2 to 3 years. You're going to see a lot more uninsured people in your clinics and in your hospitals. It also means that rural hospitals and rural clinics are going to face substantial new pressures. This is the opening salvo. We are not done. This alone is only going to save about $1 trillion. over the next 10 years. Not enough. By the way, healthcare spending over the next 10 years is projected to be 70 trillion. So cutting 1 trillion from it is really not that much. The much bigger cuts are coming, in my mind. What are they? In the next couple of years, you're going to see movement towards, I still think this is true, you're going to see movement towards block grants of Medicaid. So if you see Medicaid patients in your clinic or your hospital, you're going to see people where the reimbursement rates are likely going to go down. And then there is still conversation about something called premium support for Medicare, which is saying instead of just Medicare being given and everybody on Medicare has coverage, full coverage, that what the government could do is define a set of benefits or a set amount and have more cost sharing of Medicare beneficiaries. All of that is going to lead to a very different kind of coverage for both Medicare and Medicaid populations. Those are going to be very, very controversial, and you're going to see big political fights in Washington. In the next year, there are going to be two major policy efforts where I don't see there's going to be much fights because there's broad bipartisan agreement. One is Medicare Advantage reform. Most of us believe, doesn't matter what I believe, the Medicare Payment Advisory Commission, others believe that we overpay Medicare Advantage by about $80 to $100 billion a year. So you're going to see big reforms to reduce payments to Medicare Advantage, the private insurance companies that are managing Medicare. And the second place where you're going to see, I think you're actually going to see real progress, is on the issue of site-neutral payments. Right now, if you're a physician and you're owned by a hospital, even if you're in a private practice, you get reimbursed more than if you're a physician in independent practice. Everybody agrees that's a crazy policy, and I think this year, over the next 6 to 12 months, we're going to see real policy action on site-neutral payments, where that is going to go away. Those two things combined have the possibility of saving a lot of real money for the Medicare program. Okay, so those are areas where you're going to see bipartisan support, Medicaid block grants, and Medicare premium support. You're going to see a lot of political fights. Let me make one more point, and then I will wrap up with what I think physicians should be doing at this moment. The place where I think, and everything I just laid out is very consistent with a traditional Republican conservative agenda. And you can agree with it or disagree with it, but it's pretty reasonable. Just, I have disagreements with it, but that's fine. Where we get a little bit crazier is what is happening with the broader public health infrastructure. So as you have seen, all the folks, the staff of AAPI, the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, was fired. In the next day or so, you're going to see the announcement of the firing of the U.S. Preventive Services Task Force. All of those scientists will get fired, and they will be replaced with people who are not real scientists. And both AAPI is going to get into, is already starting to make recommendations about vaccines that don't make any sense, and you're going to see the same thing with preventive services. Right now, we count on preventive services like colon cancer screening, mammograms, to be free. A lot of that is going to come into question in the next few months and over the next year. And what is happening, for you to understand, is that states are going to start taking over. So we are going to see a patchwork where different states have different recommendations on vaccines. You're going to see different states with different things covered for preventive services. So you might see some states where mammograms are covered, but other states where you do not. And we are moving towards prevention, vaccines, other things, becoming much more driven at the state level with a lot of variation. All right, so I was told I have to finish in 10 minutes, so let me take 2 minutes to finish up talking about how I think physicians should be thinking about this moment. I've said this before, and I was saying this earlier tonight, and I'll say it to all of you now. RFK Jr., the health secretary, is not a typical Republican. He's not a typical Democrat. He's somebody who fundamentally believes that the medical profession, the medical enterprise, is corrupt. And much of what he is saying and much of what he's doing, I believe, is an effort to dismantle that. I don't actually believe that President Trump believes that. I think this is very much an RFK feature. And I think it is absolutely imperative at this point for the medical profession to speak with one clear, concerted voice about things we believe in. Now, there are probably 700, 800 people in the room. I bet we have lots of disagreements about policy, about taxes, about Medicaid. But we can all agree in some basic concepts, like evidence, scientific evidence matters, that physicians have expertise, that people should get medical advice from people who went to medical school or have other types of training. And I think speaking with a very clear voice about the things we believe in, including, in my opinion, the importance of making sure every American has health coverage, however we achieve it, is going to be very important. So my advice to all of you is it's going to be a much more tumultuous 6 to 12 months ahead than what we have seen in the last 6 months. It's going to get rockier and more complicated. Stay informed. Sign up with organizations that I think are doing really important things. I'm not just saying this because my friend Bobby is here today and is going to speak after me, but I think the AMA over the last decade has really become a very important voice for American medicine. I don't get any benefits out of if you join, but I would urge all of you to join the AMA, to become active in the AMA, to build closer relationships between AAPI and AMA, but also the other specialty societies, your own specialty societies. To speak up about making sure people have coverage, because you don't want to be seeing more and more uninsured patients in your clinic. To speak up on vaccines, to speak up on preventive services, to speak up on physician expertise as being at the heart of the medical profession. If we do not speak with a clear and concerted voice, we are going to see further declines in trust that Americans have. Trust in physicians has declined by 15 percentage points over the last 2 years. We're going to see a much further erosion if we don't speak up. So this is our moment. What I would say to all of you is, we don't have to fight every battle. You don't have to agree or disagree with every policy. But on key things, get informed, get engaged, work with AAPI, work with AMA or your specialty society. But let's come up with a core set of things that we believe in, partner with the administration on things that make sense, site-neutral payments, Medicare Advantage reform, but on things that really matter to us, like making sure science and evidence is at the heart of what we do. We've got to stand up and be a strong voice. Thank you all for listening, and thanks for AAPI for having me here.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Jha. That was a very enlightening session. I mean, I didn't realize I was going to learn so much, and some of those firings are a bit concerning. I'm glad I'm not going to get fired because this is all voluntary for me. But anyway, I'd like to invite Dr. Katul and Dr. Suk up here to recognize Dr. Jha for your service and contributions over the years.
All right, everyone. So our next guest is a man who needs little introduction in our community, but I'm going to do my best anyway. Dr. Bobby Mukkamala is not just a leader, he's a legacy. And in fact, His basement is one of those basements that Manju was talking about yesterday as the early days of AAPI's office. And in fact, his father's practice is where the original mailing address for AAPI was. So he and AAPI go way back. But not only is he an AAPI legacy, he is one of the best human beings I know. His leadership is exemplary, but he does it all with a humility that we can all aspire to. He has a vision for AMA that is one we're going to hear more about, and he is going to talk to us a little bit about that. But I'd also like to comment on, as many of you know, Bobby went through a little rough patch a few months ago. In November, he was diagnosed with a brain tumor, but in typical Bobby fashion, he bounced right back and actually came to our WMC event as a speaker and he spoke to us as if nothing had ever happened. It's truly inspiring to see Bobby's strength and positivity as an example to all of us. And here's a little spoiler alert. If you really want to stay on Bobby's good side, I would highly recommend you support Bobby's mission and make sure that your AMA membership is active. And finally, I would like to make a mention that we went from a CNN star, but now we're going to a Bollywood star.
Hey, hello. Hey, hello. Enjoy, mates. Good night. Well, that was very embarrassing. I'm very grateful to be a reasonably good doctor and be elected president of the American Medical Association because my career in Bollywood ended immediately after that movie. But good evening. It's wonderful to be here with so many of my colleagues, so many of my friends, and people that have been incredible leaders and members of AAPI. Basically, I'm with my family. Thank you. Thanks to all of you for your commitment to this profession and our culture. And thank you to AAPI for your commitment to collaborate and for bringing this conference together despite a relatively recent history of internal struggles. I've been involved with AAPI since I was a teenager. As you heard, the headquarters used to be in my dad's office, and I would lick the envelopes that were going out in the mail to grow AAPI. And I came to this meeting at a young age, much younger than I am now. And I have to confess, when I used to come, it had nothing to do with healthcare in this country. As a 16, 17-year-old boy, you can imagine why boys come to these meetings. It's to meet 16, 17-year-old girls. And so that's my confession to my mom and dad. But it's wonderful to be here today for a different reason, to promote healthcare in this country. And as you know, this is a critical moment in healthcare in this country. This is why conferences like this are so important, to come together, to work together, to partner, to work around our shared values. And there are important issues at stake right now. Issues that require our action, our advocacy, as you just heard. Issues that Dr. Ashish Jha just talked about in DC so well. Issues that affect doctors just like us. And also, doctors that are nothing like us. And we need to stand together, as you heard. This is exactly how I feel about this issue. And so I want you to know that the AMA hears you. I hear you. And as president of the AMA, I'm ready. And I'm determined that despite the chaos that's going on around us, I'm hopeful that we will collectively improve the healthcare in this country. For more than 20 years, I've been an otolaryngologist in Flint, Michigan. I've been part of the healthcare system from a particular vantage point, taking care of patients, diagnosing patients, and treating them. And now, as many of you have heard, I've become a patient. And it's humbling, it's very eye-opening, and at the same time, it's very empowering. You know, for me, it's been a journey of revelation and of transformation of my understanding about things like equity and access and the factors of preventing disease and preventing far too many patients from being shortchanged by the healthcare system. And yes, I have the means, I have the access, I have the resources to get the best in care. I'm lucky. And to the point of feeling almost guilty of having that kind of access to healthcare in this country. And it's not the kind of thing that neighbors on either side of my house in Flint, Michigan would have been able to get, right? Access to, I had half a dozen consultations with the best neurosurgeons in the country within 1 week of my diagnosis, and that's nothing that my neighbors would have gotten. So I had this 8-centimeter brain tumor that created a shift in my brain to the right side, but more importantly, it changed my perspective. It shifted my perspective on healthcare in this country. And my mission at this point, because I think somebody up there had this plan, that just literally 6 months before my inauguration as president of the American Medical Association, to put me that close to death, keep me alive, but to make me experience what it's like to be a patient, so I can be a better advocate for healthcare in this country. And so these slides are going way too fast. Am I hitting those? Yeah, we need to go back to the beginning, actually. Oh, okay, sorry. I'm not on my first slide yet. But I'm standing before you today with the advantage of being a physician, receiving that health care, and my goal is to make sure that it's never going to be that what I experienced and what everybody else experiences becomes even. But we just need to raise the overall experience with healthcare in this country. And so just a little bit of background about me. Again, you know I grew up in Michigan. It's where my parents immigrated. I told my dad I wanted to be a journalist when I was a junior in high school. And they basically grounded me and locked me in my room and didn't let me out until I told them I would go into healthcare. I would go into be a doctor. And then they finally let me out of the house and they let me live the rest of my life. And now, of course, they're happy. But I moved from Flint to Chicago. Thank you. I moved from Flint to Chicago with my wife, Nita, who's an OBGYN. We met in college. And this is another funny story. My dad, when I was graduating from college, drove me home. And that was the moment where he said, okay, I think it's time to start looking for your future wife. And that's when I had to do a confession. And I basically said, Dad, I'm sorry. I've been dating this girl named Nita. She's from Maharashtra. And I think we're going to get married. And there was silence for the whole ride home, 45-minute ride home. But by the end of that 40 minutes, he accepted that I wasn't going to marry a Telugu girl, that I'm going to marry a Marathi girl. And it's been heaven ever since. And then, of course, my sister did one more than that. She married a 6'7" tall white guy. And then I looked like I did something fantastic. So we've since had twin boys, Nikhil and Devin, and Nita and I share an office together. But as you can see, I mean, this is a slide that I use in 99% of my AMA speeches, because I think it's important to share the history of an individual that holds this position. Okay. And so this is my dad's village home. He grew up with 8 siblings in Buddhavaram, Andhra Pradesh. And this is my mom's village, a little bit nicer. She grew up with 4 siblings in Totlavalur, in basically village Andhra Pradesh. And I used to love going to these homes. I used to, right here on this road on the right, there used to be the sugarcane guy. They would come on a cart early in the morning. And I loved sugarcane. I mean, I could never have enough sugarcane. So I'd stand out there by myself begging for a piece of sugarcane. He would always give it to me. And these are memories of me when I was 6, 7 years old. And this stands out in my mind because I remember that street. These are wonderful memories, and I'm proud of having my parents come from there to here and contribute to the healthcare in this country. And so this is them. You know, they moved when they were 25 years of age with basically no roots of support here in this country. And I remember, you know, going to Flint, Michigan, where they did their residency. Most of 99% of the people in my classes were white. And so my nickname was Brownie. And I had no idea that was something that was kind of, you know, a little racist, things like that. I thought it was kind of funny. I thought maybe it's because I was sweet because I tasted like brownies, but no. I was a brown-skinned guy. But Grand Blanc was a move for us. They did their residency in the city of Flint, and they moved to Grand Blanc, which is a nicer sort of white suburb. We were the first brown family to move into this home. We were allowed to do that. My dad's best friend from residency was a guy named Sam Dismond. He was a black man. He was the chief of internal medicine residency. This was 1975. My mom and dad were allowed to buy this home in the suburbs, but this black man was not. Right? This was 1975. The same home in 1987, my parents sold to the first black family in that neighborhood. And my dad had to call the FBI. He had to call the FBI because we got death threats in 1987, not MLK time, but 1987, in my lifetime, in many of our lifetimes, because this was the nature of the city at that time. This was the nature of the country at that time. And then fast forward to just a few years ago. I got very involved in making 3D printed masks to protect people from COVID, doing COVID vaccinations, and I basically got death threats for talking about COVID. It became such a social issue, right? And thank you so much for Dr. Jha for protecting me by putting that on CNN and talking about that for the entire country. But even then, we had to send the letters to the FBI because people said they were going to come and kill me for vaccinating people. People told me to go back to the communist country of India where I came from. This is literally what these letters said. And I was just laughing because, one, I was born in Pittsburgh, right? And two, India is the biggest democracy on our planet. And yet he's telling me to go back to communist India. Right? And so this is exactly what I told the news about the foolishness of the attitude as it relates to that. But going back to where I was when I graduated medical school, just to keep my parents happy, just to keep them off my back, I was very apathetic. I hardly did anything to improve healthcare. All I did was to keep my parents happy, to go to a competitive residency in otolaryngology in Chicago, just to keep my parents off my back. But I guess I would say I was a late bloomer. And so this is my son on the right, this is me. When things happen in our country that bother me, my goal is to try to improve that so it doesn't happen again. Right? So this was the murder of George Floyd. George Floyd was a black man in Minnesota that did something wrong, and when he got arrested, he died before he even got to jail. Right? And this bothered me, this bothered my son. So what I tell people is that there's a risk to being a leader to pursue things like diversity or equity in our country. And this is exactly the slide I show to medical students, and I know we have many young physicians and medical students in this room, that we have to assess what our willingness is to take risk behind our passion. If our passion is for allowing this country to be an open door to international medical graduates, particularly from my country of origin, from India, if that is the passion, this is the organization that we should work with to make that happen. Absolutely. And so it's recognizing that passion. If it's the murder of people inappropriately, then there's a way to exercise that passion. If there's a desire to improve healthcare in this country for everybody, the AMA is the answer to executing that passion. And that's when I got involved with the AMA to make healthcare better for our country. And so I also tell medical students and the people that I give this talk to that the leaders must be creative. Right? So when I volunteered to start vaccinating people, we had 1,000 people at a time come through our malls and come through our airports to get vaccinated. And then slowly the interest in vaccination went down. Right? We got to about 55% of my community was vaccinated, and then they stopped. And so then I started to see patients in my office, just to talk to them about what mRNA was, right, versus a traditional vaccine, just to answer their questions and see whether or not they might get to the point where they said, you know what, now I understand, please vaccinate me. And so that's what I did in my office. And the solution to these things is to basically, if we fail, we try again, right? We shouldn't give up. And so this is me. The Flint is a very black community, right? Where more than 50% of the folks that live in the city with me are black. There was definitely a hesitancy to get vaccinated. So I went to concerts, I went to carnivals, things like that where the black community was getting together. I set up a table just to show them what it's like so they didn't have to come to an office. They didn't have to come to a hospital to get vaccinated. We would come to them. Right? And slowly our vaccination rate went up and we stopped losing people. I lost a business partner of mine at the age of 39, a father of 5 kids, to COVID. Right? And slowly we improved that by doing this kind of work. And so what I tell everybody, especially the young people in our career, is that our goal is to leave it better than we found it for the next generation. I think I'm a 54-year-old doctor now. I feel like I've been around the block a few times. Our goal, my goal, is to leave healthcare in this country better for the next generation. The next generation in this room, the next generation in this country, whose goal is to improve healthcare. Oh, those are my kids, by the way. This was on the anniversary of 9/11. So this was a more recent development. So in November of last year, I was giving a speech to people within the American Medical Association, people that have heard me speak before. And when I started to have an expressive aphasia, where the words I was saying weren't making any sense, they thought I had a stroke. And so immediately they sent me to the emergency department. This was in Orlando. In fact, I was there earlier this morning giving a speech, and then I came back here, and I felt a little scared to be back in the same city where my tumor got diagnosed. But I went to the emergency department because everyone thought I had a stroke. All of the vital signs were perfect, right? So they said, well, maybe you had a TIA. When you go home, get an MRI scan. So I got home from the AMA meeting on Tuesday night. A friend of mine is a neurosurgeon. As soon as I got home from the airport, I went there to get my MRI scan, and I was getting it done, and this is what it showed, right? Obviously, it doesn't take an MD or a DO to figure out that left side picture, that big white thing on the left side of my brain, didn't belong. And so that was basically, it turned out to be a grade 2 astrocytoma. About 3 weeks after that, I had my surgery at Mayo Clinic. They got 90% of that tumor out. So you can see here, the medial aspect, there's still a little bit of a white clump. So my brain is smaller, but I'm a happier guy. So. But what I realized then was that somebody up there had this planned. Right? They had me go through this so I could be a better advocate for healthcare. And a good friend of mine, and somebody that Dr. Jha knows from CNN very well, Sanjay Gupta, was my classmate at the University of Michigan. And so we did a pre-op podcast about my experience, and then a post-op podcast just to try to improve the perspective on healthcare in this country, the access that I had, and then even then, more than just access, just how I felt about potentially dying from this. Because preoperatively, I didn't know that it was going to be grade 2 astrocytoma. Right now, if you Google that, that has about a 10-year life expectancy. But it was possible that it might have come back with a 10-month life expectancy if this was grade 4. So I remember having this potential outcome, right, being gone in 10 months. And my parents, they made me go to Blvd class every Sunday from the age of 5 all the way through high school, Yuva Kendra, then satsang. And what I remember vividly at that moment was that I was comfortable with everything I learned in those Blvd classes, that there is a reincarnation, right? And so I told my parents, you told me not to be attached to my body, right? I don't care that there's an 8-centimeter thing in my brain. I'm not attached to this body. I'm coming back. I haven't, my vasanas are bad enough that they're sending me back, right? I'm not going to stay up there. And so I told them, I said, I'm not attached to this body. And so when they heard this, they were happy about how much I learned from all the Swami Chinmayananda was somebody that they followed, and I met him so many times. I didn't know what I was learning at the time, but at this moment, in a near-death experience, I completely was comfortable with however long I lived. I'm happy with whatever happens. I'll work hard in this capacity, in any capacity, until I'm gone. And I was detached. They were proud of me for being detached, but naturally as parents, they were very sad, and I saw my dad cry twice in my whole life, and it was in the past year. The first time he cried was when we got this diagnosis. I was in my office seeing patients until the day we went to Mayo Clinic, the next day for my surgery. And he came to the office, my mom came, just to watch me take care of patients because they didn't want to miss me. And I remember walking into my office from when I just saw a patient, and my dad was bawling. And of course, we didn't say anything at the time. But the first time I saw him cry. Then, the second time I saw him cry was at my inauguration as president of the American Medical Association just last month. So it went from tears of sorrow to tears of joy, and it was wonderful to experience that. And the other thing is my parents, every time we went to India, and now that we can do it online, they bought me every issue of the Amar Chitra Kada comic book. And I read every single one of those. I still read them. When kids come to my house, I insist that we open up Karna or the Mahabharata. But my favorite one was always, even before anything happened recently, about Abhimanyu. And so then I told my parents also, after this diagnosis, that look, Arjuna lost his son, but he didn't give up, right? He and his brothers ended up winning that war and became the kings as Pandavas, right? And so how can you argue against that? That parent, that father, was not upset about losing his son. Of course he was upset, but it didn't paralyze him for life. And so I told my dad, he should call me Abhimanyu and I'll start calling him Arjuna. He thought that was funny. And so this is, you'll notice this is the exact same suit that I wore at my inauguration. I thought, if the AMA deserves seeing me like this, everybody in this room deserves seeing me like this. So, but it was an amazing experience. And I mean, again, the first time there's ever been an Indian president of the AMA, despite being almost 10% of the doctors in this country. And so I had to decide about, and my friends from the AMA are here, Dr. Underwood and Dr. Sook, and so we all had this conversation about, the pictures that they take at this speech. Every single man who's ever given the speech as president of the AMA has always worn a tuxedo, always. And I thought, you know what? Should I wear a Nehru suit? Because there's never been an Indian physician, not about me, but there's never been an Indian physician president of the American Medical Association. And so I thought, okay, well, maybe at the dinner, which is going to be the first time there's ever been Indian food at this, maybe at dinner I'll change into a Nehru suit or I'll wear a tuxedo for the inauguration. And then Dr. Sook, who was chair of the board at the time, told me that, you know what, I'm going to wear a Nehru suit at your inauguration. If you wear a suit, they're going to think you're a hypocrite. So you should wear a Nehru suit also. And so I wore this Nehru suit, and thank you, Dr. Sook, for making me do the right thing. But this is what the speech that I gave, and I want to, this is exactly the thoughts that I had about what we need to do in this country so that our patients can get what they deserve, which is better, that our physicians deserve better. Our ability to take care of our patients shouldn't be impeded by stupid rules about prior authorization and constantly not keeping up with the cost of providing care to our patients by Medicare payments that just don't keep up with the cost of providing that care. Our nation deserves better service from physicians to their patients. There's just too much in between us. And so these are our top advocacy priorities within the AMA. Reforming the Medicare payment, because everything is based on Medicare payment. Every private insurance, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan, their payment is basically 110% of Medicare. Where Medicare goes, everybody follows. And this is the fight we have in DC. Prior authorization, right? I mean, I understand the pill that I take for that brain tumor to try to keep that last 10% from growing costs $250,000 per year, right? Every day I take $900 worth of those pills. It's one of those pills, like if I drop an aspirin, I just take another aspirin from the jar. But if I drop this $900 pill, I pick it up, I rinse it off, and I still take it, right? That's how expensive it is. And I understand prior authorization for something that expensive. But insulin for a diabetic needs to be prior approved every 90 days. As if in 90 days we're going to have a cure for insulin for diabetes and you won't need your insulin anymore. That is ridiculous. Right? And so these are the things we fight when it comes to prior authorization. Advancements in digital health and telehealth. That was an amazing silver lining during COVID, that we were able to take care of our patients via telemedicine. And that's something that we want to continue to have that be an option there. Reducing physician burnout. Almost 50% of physicians are burnt out. Right? They have some symptoms of burnout. This is what caused my parents without any burnout, because practice was wonderful at that time. Private practice was so invigorating that they worked until they couldn't work anymore. They retired in their 70s. This generation, my friends, when I ask them, when I walk into their home for dinner, because all of us get together, the majority of them, 90% of them, are thinking about, okay, when I turn 60, when I turn 62, when I turn 65, I'm just going to stop. This is just too much to deal with. That is a consequence of physician burnout, and that is why the AMA is so active in trying to deal with those things that cause the burnout. And then finally, the scope creep. When we have a physician shortage of almost 80,000 physicians within the next several years, the solution that so many towns, so many states come up with is, well, we don't have enough doctors, we'll put a nurse practitioner in that position, right? Nurse practitioners, they have about 18 months, 20 months of online classes, 600 hours of clinical work, and then in half of our country almost, they can take care of patients just like doctors, right? We have 4 years of medical school, at least 3 years of residency, mine was 5, some are longer, 10,000 hours of clinical care to do the same thing. And this is exactly what the AMA works on, because I don't want the health of our country to go down because of decisions like this. And that's exactly what happens. And so These are the issues that matter to doctors, whether they're Indian in origin, whether they're African in origin, whether they're European in origin. These are the issues that matter to all of us. And that's why the AMA and what we do is so important. And our patients care. You know, their care is at risk when non-physicians do this work, right? I see patients every day in my office. I used to see maybe one patient per month from an urgent care because we had enough primary care physicians. Now I see 4 or 5 a day from an urgent care, every single one of which has been diagnosed with otitis media and their ear is perfect, right? This is a failure of having non-physicians managing the care. And so this is the work of the American Medical Association. Thank you. And these are our top advocacy priorities that you just heard me go through. And so this is Flint, Michigan. This is the town that my dad ended up accepting the radiology residency here because it paid $400 more per year than this other place he got accepted to, which was called Johns Hopkins University. He never heard of that before, so he came to Flint to Hurley Hospital because it paid $400 more per year. And so that's, of course, where I ended up. But Flint has a history, right? I mentioned some of the history already when my parents moved there. This is a post-industrial town. Right, we used to have 180,000 people. Now we have 80,000 people in the city. Right, we have a majority Medicaid population. With what just happened in Washington, D.C., as you just heard from Dr. Jha, with almost 12 million people expected to lose their insurance coverage because of the cuts in Medicaid, what are we supposed to do? Right? I can see people without insurance in my office. But what if somebody like that has a cancer in their throat and I have to biopsy that and they don't have insurance? Somehow, we've decided as a country that if you don't have insurance, too bad, your stage 1 cancer will turn to stage 4 cancer and we'll say goodbye when it ends. That is wrong. Right? And that's what we need to improve on. And that's what the AMA has become very much vocal about. And so these are our federal advocacy about IMGs. I am so happy to be here to tell you about how hard the AMA works to preserve the ability of international medical graduates to come to this country with an open door like my parents came in 1970 when we needed them badly. We still need them. We're going to be 80,000 physicians short. And so to be able to create policies that make it easier for international medical graduates to solve that problem in our country is critical. And this is exactly what the AMA does. I mean, just recently when they decided that J1 visas, right, were going to be held to stop the immigration of people because all of that gets frozen. That had an immediate effect because just a few weeks ago is when residency started. And all of a sudden, residents from India that got accepted to start their residency in my hometown in Flint, Michigan, which is majority IMGs, they couldn't come. They're at risk of losing that residency because a hospital is not going to wait too long. And this is exactly when the AMA sent a note to Washington, D.C., to this administration saying you cannot do this to J1 visa holders who are starting their residency. Right? This is exactly what the AMA does. And we do this every day. Right? And so I'm glad to make that connection between the people in this room and the people in the other room that I go to, which is the American Medical Association's House of Delegates. And so, again, I mean, we know at the AMA about the critical role that IMGs play in healthcare. And so we fill those voids in places like Flint, Michigan, right? Were it not for IMGs, we would lose 75% of the doctors in Flint, Michigan. And what is the consequence of that? People will get sick when that illness could have been prevented. People will die when that death could have been prevented. And that's because of IMGs. And that's how we make sure that everybody knows of the influence of IMGs, about physicians from India like my parents' generation that are keeping our city healthy. And so this is how the AMA supports IMGs, right? I mentioned so much of the work that we do. We sent a letter to the House Judiciary Committee, the Subcommittee on Immigration and Citizenship, talking about the importance of IMGs. And so we have so many statistics about IMGs that we share, about increasing the new IMGs and supporting the coming into this country to start their residency, advocating for removal of the restrictions with the H-1B status that they have. There's so many laws that get in the way of improving healthcare with international medical graduates. And I meet so many and listen to so many AAPI members over the years that I've witnessed the amazing generosity of so many immigrant Indians to improving the healthcare of this country, right? That is a wonderful thing that we do. But, thank you. As I also told my parents, who spent 25 years in India, in 55 years in the United States. Their focus, up until recently, has always been on improving the motherland, right? Improving Bharat. But I told them, you've spent 55 years in this country. You should also have a goal of improving this country, right? And so my mom opened the pediatric clinic in downtown Flint, right? Just a few years ago. When you walk into that clinic, you see a big picture of her there, which is wonderful because she's a retired pediatrician. But this is our role, is to improve the country where we came from and to improve the country where we live. And I know that AAPI has so much activity to improve health in India, which is desperately needed. I see that every time I go. But we should also be committed to improving the health of the country that welcomed us when it needed us. And so that's what I would love to see us do. And so let me just close with just expressing that there is no doubt that we are at a critical moment in our nation with our profession. And the AMA is ready for that challenge, right? We need to change the direction that we're going in healthcare in this country. And no organization, not even the AMA, can do that on our own. And so I ask that you stand with us, that you work with us, because there's never been an Indian president of the American Medical Association. I know, I got so many calls that we're going to join the AMA. And it's because they happen to make me the president. And that's fine, that's wonderful. I'm happy to have anybody join. But please don't join because of me. Please join because of the importance to the healthcare of our country with the perspective of people that have their roots in India. That is critical. And so the AMA recognizes the importance of Indian physicians, as I've shown you so many examples of. But this statistic on the left side is what makes me lose sleep at night when I go to the AMA and I ask them for permission to come to an AAPI meeting. I've got invited to 3 more Indian physician meetings just in the past 48 hours. And when I ask permission from the AMA to go, this is the statistic that comes to many of their minds. I bring them together to pray for all of us to improve healthcare in this country. Thank you so much.
All right, what a big deal. We had the trio. It's like the stars lining up for us. So,
Doesn't happen often, especially outside of AMA, so we're really honored to have all 3 of them here today.
in fact, never happens. So anyway, Bobby, that was great hearing you talk and very inspiring. You joined us at our winter medical conference, and that was also very inspiring for us young physicians, and to see you as the first ever elected Indian American president of the AMA. So that was great to see you talk. So next we have a true legend joining us, a Nobel laureate, Dr. Mario Capecchi, who has had a lifetime of research in so many different areas. I mean, he has so much to share with us, and I'm excited to hear what he's been working on next. But actually introducing Dr. Capecchi is going to be a physician scientist, Dr. Balamkonda Kishore, as many of you may know him as Dr. B.K. Kishore. He is an expert in his own right. He's been a dedicated fan of the kidney and an academician at the University of Utah. He has written multiple books, including motivational books, and has also patented some amazing technologies. And then lastly, he's also the founder and chief editor of our AAPI medical journal, JAPI. So with that, I'd like to invite up Dr. B.K. Kishore and Dr. Mario Capecchi.
And I was asked to make a brief announcement that Bobby Mukkamala will be with us all evening, so if we could please let him have a seat and enjoy the rest of the evening. There will be time to take pictures later.
Thank you. Hello, good evening. I have the honor of introducing a very accomplished, almost like a legend in science and medicine. Is Dr. Mario Capecchi is a Nobel laureate in physiology or medicine in 2007. He is also a distinguished professor of human genetics and biology at the Spencer Fox Eccles School of Medicine, University of Utah, where I am an adjunct faculty. Does it move? Doesn't move. Okay, thank you. Sorry. Dr. Marriott Capecchi got the Nobel Prize along with Sir Martin Evans and Oliver Smithies for their discoveries of the principles of introducing specific gene modifications in mice by the use of embryonic stem cells. This was an unheard technology at that time. It is equivalent to the producing the first test tube baby or first cardiac transplantation. When Dr. Capecchi submitted a grant to the NIH that he will do this thing, NIH rejected that grant and said it's impossible. But today, this is a routine technique in every research lab. Oh, sorry. So I'm not going to the details of all his accomplishments, and he was born in Italy in 1937. And he got a BS and degree, and then he did PhD in biophysics from Harvard University, working under the guidance of none other than J.D. Watson, who discovered the structure of the DNA. And then he also started working in assistant professor and got promoted to the associate professor in the Harvard University. In 1973, he moved to the University of Utah as a professor of biology and was designated as a distinguished professor in 1993. He was inducted as a member of the National Academy of Science in 1991 and also in the European Academy of Sciences in 2002 and American Society Academy of Arts and Sciences. He received the Albert Lasker Award for Basic Medical Sciences in 2001, which is considered as a prelude for Nobel Prize. Then Professor Capecchi told me that every 10 years he switches his topic just to stimulate his brain. You can understand, he is 87 years old and is running an active lab with 15 or 20 people in the lab. And thank you.
And science is an enormous problem. Anxiety, oops, sorry. The National Institute of Mental Health reported that the lifetime occurrence of chronic anxiety is greater than 20% among adults, with higher prevalence in women, 23.4%, than men, 14.8%. These statistics are even more disturbing among adolescents, where 38% of females and 24% of males report disabling anxiety. In mice, we reported that disruption of a single gene, HOXP8, results in both chronic anxiety and excessive pathological grooming, leading to lesions at the sites of overgrooming, OCD-like behavior. As in humans, both behavioral pathologies, chronic anxiety and pathological overgrooming, show strong sex bias, with females exhibiting more aggressive pathologies. It's not advancing. There we go. Oh, come back. So this is a heat map. This is mice. My patients are mostly mice, not humans. And this is simply overlap of about 20 different mice and the amount of grooming they do that actually removes the body hair on the mice. So this is a wild type mouse on your left, and then a female mutant mouse shows much more aggressive behavior than a male mutant mouse. What is the causative agent of the cell types that cause these pathology? First, we approach this problem by determining the HOXP8 cell lineage in the brain. This shows, we use GFP as a marker, the green color, and these, to our surprise, the only green cells in the brain that were labeled green were microglia. Okay? And then the red cell shows a common marker for microglia. And so we see the microglia that I was working with is a subpopulation, about 25% of total microglia. Okay. So what are microglia? They're immune cells, okay? And they're derived from hemopoiesis and function as a brain macrophage, whose role is to remove dead cells and cellular debris, as well as mount an immune response, for example, to invading pathogens like bacteria and viruses. But what we're suggesting is quite something different. We're suggesting that microglia label HOXB8 cells that regulate specific neuron circuits, and that dysregulation of these cells results in giving a pathological behavior, specifically chronic anxiety and pathological overgrooming. Now, what is the ontogeny of the HOXB8 microglia? It's been posited that all cell microglia progenies come from a single source, and they derive from the yolk sac and then migrate directly into the brain starting at E8.5. The gestation period of a mouse is roughly 20 days. So this represents about half of their lifetime. But what we found was there are actually two microglia populations. One which, so we used essentially GFP to label all microglia, and then RFP, TD tomato, to label specifically HOXB8 microglia. And you can see here that again, it's a subpopulation of microglia representing about 25% of the total microglia population. Okay. Next slide, please. Here we go. Okay, so what we wanted to do, first of all, to see when do yellow cells, HOXB8 microglia, arrive in the brain. Okay, and the gestation period, again, as I've repeated in the mouse, is about 20 days, and then we're following at P is after birth. So we see that at 10.5 days of gestation, there are no HOXB8 microglia, and then all of a sudden at E12 we start seeing a little bit, and they slowly increase until they reach a plateau at around 16 days after birth. Okay. So there's two possibilities for addressing this question. And one is to say that the subpopulation, the green cells, essentially a subpopulation, turn yellow, turn on HOXB8. And then the other possibility is that these cells, a new cell population comes in from the outside of the brain and then it goes into the brain starting at E12.5. We could distinguish between these two possibilities simply by seeing when the expression pattern of the gene itself, that is, when is it making HOXB8 protein? Oh, oops, back one. Okay, so here we're looking at the expression pattern in the yolk sac, AGM, fetal liver, and finally in the brain. So you see high expression in the yolk sac very early, and then in the AGM, some expression in fetal liver, but what we see is it's never expressed in the brain itself. So that rules out the first possibility. And back one. Okay, so it rules out rules it right here. These are the two models. So the initial population that goes in the brain are born at 8.5 in the yolk sac, and then directly migrate into the brain at 9.5 once the vascular is formed. Whereas HOXB8 microglia have a very different route. They're also born in the yolk sac, but a day later, E8.5, and then go to the AGM, expand 16-fold, then go to the fetal liver, expand 180-fold, and then start going into the brain at E12 and a half days of gestation. So the two microglia have very different histories, and therefore obviously it's going to express different genes. So are defective HOXB8 microglia causative for chronic anxiety and pathological overgrooming? And the answer is yes. And the way we discovered that, next slide please, is to essentially transplant purified microglia into the brain and then ask what happens. So we take HOXB8 microglia and mutant microglia separately, purify them, put them back into the brain of a mouse where we depleted all the microglia. We can do that genetically, and then see the consequences of having either wild type or mutant microglia enter the brain. Next slide. So here's the transplantation. Here you can see that both mutant and wild type microglia get into the brain, grow and spread all over the brain for more or less equally. And here's the actual consequences of that experiment. If we put wild-type microglia back into the brain, then there's no pathological grooming. If we put mutant microglia, now you can see extensive removal of body hair. It's pathological. If we look at how much time spent grooming, compared to the wild-type, the mutant microglia mice could spend twice as much time grooming. If we look at anxiety, then we find that the one mutant microglia produce twice as much as anxiety as wild-type mice. Okay, so this provides a proof because the only new cells that the mouse has are derived from purified and then put back into the brain and then give rise to the behavior. So this tells us indeed that the mutant microglia are responsible for the pathology. Okay. So from then, and that's essentially what this says. The next slide. So we're now in a position to determine mechanistically how do HOXB8 microglia work. Okay, both in terms of producing anxiety as well as grooming behavior. So, and the requirements is now optogenetics. Optogenetics is simply using essentially channels which are sensitive to light. They're actually derived from algae out in the ocean that are doing photosynthesis, and you only can do photosynthesis during the light. Okay, so the channels operate when light's present and are non-operative when it's dark. So, whoops, come back here. No, backwards. So what are the requirements for doing optogenetics? So optogenetics, we have essentially a laser that's going through a cord, and then we can put the laser at any position in the brain of the mouse and then activate the cells that are at that point. Okay, and we require a Cree driver, and then we require Cree-dependent channel rhodopsin, which is the channel itself and dependent on light. Okay. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. I keep pushing, but nothing. Here we go. So here we're looking at an actual experiment. So we'll go to this particular experiment. So if we don't have light showing, there's no grooming behavior. As soon as we turn on the light for about 2 minutes, then we see lots of mice grooming. And then if we turn off the laser, then the grooming goes back down to zero. Okay, and this happens to be in the medial prefrontal cortex, and the same also happens in the dorsal medium striatum. Okay, so what happens if we stimulate optogenetically the amygdala? All of you know what the amygdala is about, emotions and feelings. And what happens is we don't have any grooming happening in the mice, but instead we have elevated anxiety. Okay? So here's an example of how we measure anxiety. So you have two runways that are orthogonal to each other, and one has walls on either side, and the other is completely open. Okay, a normal mouse will frequent both runways equally, but an anxious mouse will obviate the open arm because it looks down and is scary. So it obviates that. Come back here. No, back. Okay. Okay, here we go. Okay, so what we see when we go into looking at the behavior in the amygdala, then we see essentially in the absence of the light, then the mouse is going both in the open arm and the closed arm. But as soon as we turn on the light, now it obviates the open arm and then stays in the closed arm. If we turn off the light, then it now starts wandering back and forth on both arms. Okay. And so here's a different assay for anxiety. It's simply a box with walls on all sides. And then a normal mouse will frequent all areas of the mouse, and that's shown up above, and now also below, in particular components of where it's happening. So what happened if we epigenetically stimulate microglia in the VCA hippocampal, and then under those conditions you get both behaviors, shown in here. Okay. And that's shown here. So here is, now if the light is off, here we see the mouse is traveling everywhere. As soon as you turn on the light, it restricts itself to the closed arm, and then as soon as we turn off the light again, then the mouse starts going in both directions. Okay, and this is with respect to the grooming behavior. In the absence of light, no grooming behavior. In the presence of light, lots of behavior. Okay. So thus far, what I've shown you, the results from optogenetic activation of HOXP8 microglia in specific regions of the brain. Now, what happens if we genetically activate non-HOXP8 microglia? However, we can't do this experiment because we don't have a genetic marker that's specific for non-HOXP8 microglia. Okay? But what we can do is use a driver that activates both populations of microglia and then subtract out what happens in HOXP8 microglia, leaving what happens in non-HOXP8 microglia. Okay. Next slide, please. Whoops, back. One. Okay, so the expectation was that we see no differences if one possibility is we see no difference between HOXP8 and non-HOXP8 microglia, saying that non-HOXP8 microglia do not contribute to anxiety. On the other hand, we could see higher levels, and that would indicate that both microglia populations contribute to anxiety. But what we found was, again, unexpected. Next slide, please. Yep. Boom. Okay. Whoops, back. Back. Okay. One back? No? Okay. What do we see? We obtained completely unexpected results, and what we saw was right here. Next slide. Optogenetically activation of both microglia population resulted in actually no activity, no grooming activity, no anxiety activity, which was also, again, unexpected. Okay, and here's the data. So here we're going into putting the laser into the striatum, activating microglia within the striatum, and what you can see, usually what we would have seen is lots of grooming in the presence of the light, but here we see no effect. And we see that continuously, no matter how we look. And the same is true also in the medial prefrontal cortex. So this was completely unexpected and had to rearrange how we think about this. Okay, next slide, please. So this model provides a reason for the existence of two microglia. That is, now what we're seeing is, in the absence of when we activate both populations, nothing's happening. And when we turn it on, now we see, depending on whether it's HOXP8 or non-HOXP8, the different behaviors. Okay, so this model makes another very strong prediction. and that is that non-HOXB8 microglia alone would produce lots of activity. HOXB8 being the brake would not produce any activity, and the right mixture of the two would produce a little bit more activity. And this shows the actual mice. Back one, please. Sees essentially that in non-HOXB8 microglia, just purified that leads to loss of hair, whereas HOXB8 microglia, which functions as a brake, has no effect, and then the mixture of the two together at the right levels gives no effect. Next slide, please. Okay. So what I've showed you so far, we activate microglia, which activates neurons, which then gives rise to behavior. Can we induce grooming anxiety and observe response by microglia? That is, can we do the experiment backwards? We now activate the mice with grooming, then look at the microglia to see whether they respond. So we're going essentially from, back again, one slide. One slide back. No, backwards. The other way. Backwards. One more. One back. One more. Okay, well, forget it. So what I'm showing you is that when you don't have any light, you have no effect on the microglia. As soon as you turn on the light, we see lots of effect in the microglia, and then when we turn off the light, then again we see no microglia. So it's only during that period that you have the light on that you see activity. How do we activate the mice? We use water spray to induce small amount of grooming, and then we use an oil droplet for the next one. And right now we've gone all the way to the end. Where's the rest of it? Sorry. Are there more slides there or not? Sorry, there's a technical issue, so we can't see the rest of the slides. So I'll just conclude by saying that we found out that we could look at the mice from the completely different perspective, that is inducing grooming, then going all the way back to the microglia and seeing that they react. And so we now can do these experiments going one way or the other way, and then that allows us now to go and look at neurons and see which neurons are working in this system, and then give rise to anxiety and pathological overgrooming. So I just want to conclude that, first of all, I want to thank the organizers for inviting me and be able to participate in this your wonderful meeting. And it also is a great privilege to be able to speak with you, and I'm sorry that the talk didn't go as well as it should have. I apologize. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Capecchi. It's an honor to have a Nobel laureate here at our AAPI meeting. So, yes. We'd like to invite Dr. Kaza and Dr. Mukkamala and Dr. Bellamkonda Kishore to please join us in felicitating Dr. Capecchi.